How are you complicit in creating the conditions you say you don't want? It's a game-changing question to ask yourself when you're feeling trapped in a situation or a victim of an injustice. Now let me tell you how this very useful quote from Jerry Colonna also relates to some aspects of patriarchy. First, a bit of context. I am a former champion in 2 gravity sports called street luge and classic luge. This is how it looks like. In the early 2010s, I was one of the fastest riders around, men included. I was reaching very decent rankings in World Cups. And at that time, I was also known as the fastest woman on the scene. In 2018, I gave a TEDx talk sharing how self-awareness was the key to the most fulfilling performance. I decided to use my street luge journey as a way to illustrate my message. Yet, I knew there was a layer of complexity I did not have time to address in this talk, and it felt important to do it. See, back when I was racing, I could not ignore that my inner state on a start line was very different depending on the gender I was racing with. With women, I was confident and pretty competitive. With men, I could easily doubt myself, even if I knew I was a good rider. In racing in World Cups, I was really tempted to give up when I was getting closer to the finals. I've been called out a few times by friends of mine, fellow male riders, who did not understand why I was doing this to myself, while they were totally convinced I belonged there and I could beat them. They believed in me more than I believed in myself. Back in those days, we had thought-provoking discussions on gender issues and equality in gravity and action sports. These discussions combined with everything I could already observe around me since I was a student in an engineering school, a very male-dominated environment, sparked a deep interest, an interest in women's empowerment dynamics and the role men could play in it. My start line syndrome, as I like to call it, was for sure partly generated by the fact that there were higher levels of competition and pressure in open category rather than with women. But not only. There were some inner sabotage going on, making me doubt I was worthy and settle for too little, resulting in toxic thinking patterns that somehow reaching semifinals as a woman in open category was enough of an achievement, or that anyway racing with men was too risky. Even if deep inside I knew those were only excuses and not a reflection of the objective reality. Also, I knew that I had the skills and the will to be on the podium. It only happened once. Because contradictions and conditionings, programmings were standing in my way. I was standing in my own way. Nobody else was. And one thing is sure, I am not an isolated case. Over the years, I've observed or talked to so many women who, like me, were sabotaging their empowerment, consciously or not, in different fields of their lives. When it comes to discussions about gender issues and patriarchy, we focus on domestic, street, or corporate violence, on repression and inequalities, because it's needed. Awful and unfair things are happening to women every day all over the world. Things are really shifting lately, and we can see this topic brought to the level of the G7 and the UN, which is fantastic news. The people doing this work, they have the potential to make history. But in our everyday life, we have different ways to support that work. And today I'd like to share with you 2 ways, 2 ideas that could really make a difference for us women who are not in our everyday life suffering from such things that I just listed. First, there is a much less talked about aspect of patriarchy. something hiding in women's unconscious mind in subtle ways, even the most empowered. An inheritance due to millennials of programming that can't disappear over the course of half a century or so. This discrete expression of patriarchy is showing up in everyday thoughts or action of many women, even the ones like me who don't feel like they suffer from patriarchy and even less contribute to it, even in the women who are trying to fight patriarchy. And I've cherry-picked a few examples for you. First, the one I just mentioned as an introduction. Playing small, devaluing oneself, not feeling worthy, and ending up not really trying. It can translate into not seeing yourself winning or not even fully engaging on that path in the first place. It can translate into not applying for that job, not starting that sport, not asking for that raise or promotion, not speaking up an idea. We often refer to it as women's glass ceiling. Then there's another one, maybe more niche, but actually very important. It's how many women embrace excessively masculine codes and behaviors, and not the most mature, in order to rise to top positions in corporate. Unfortunately, as of today, many of them feel like they don't have any alternative in order to get the position they know they deserve, or to protect themselves once there. And they go for it because it works, all the while knowing that they're not serving women or even themselves in the long run. Then there's a third example. It's a bit tricky to address because it comes from a good place. It's women's groups. They have appeared in sports, of course, but also in fields like corporate, business, entrepreneurship, and spirituality. When they are well managed, they can be really empowering and push women to show up. Or they can do harm if they are not facilitated carefully, because a lot of women use them to validate each other's fears and beliefs, resulting in mental limitations in terms of what they can achieve, going back in the first point, and creating separation with men that observe that from the outside and say, what did we do wrong? I've seen this a lot in the street luge and board sports in general. And it's a real thing, and it's happening in many other places. Last but not least, fourth example, maybe the saddest of all. It is judgment and jealousy between women for being too much of this, not enough of that. Sexy, bossy, successful, insecure, you name it. It's very likely our biggest contribution to patriarchy. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that as a woman you are not allowed to dislike another woman. Of course you can. Yet, I really encourage you to take a look at the nature of your dislikes and on why they show up. You really might be surprised. I'm not judging. I'm stating facts, experiences, and testimonies, so many of them. These are meaningful examples, but I'm sure you can come up with more, maybe related to house chores. It's a topic that would deserve a whole TEDx by itself. I have fallen, pretty much as every woman, in these kind of traps over the course of my life. Acknowledging that some of our behaviors and beliefs contribute to maintain a system we want to see disappear can feel unfair or excessive, maybe even ridiculous for some of you. At first, because when you take a closer look, you quickly realize that there is something liberating in owning that we are, to a certain extent, co-creators of everything that happens to us. For that it means we have the power to address our behaviors and emulate change for and around us. By admitting our dualities, our human nature, we can create a strong mindset shift that can really change your life far beyond gender biases. And let me give you an example in order to illustrate so you can maybe relate more. Embracing that mindset made me understand and overcome my professional burnout 6 years ago. It would have been easy to blame people, situation, context, manipulations. Yet I had ignored all the red flags. I persisted in a comfort zone, in a status quo, out of fear of the unknown. And also, I was accepting on a regular basis questionable behaviors from some people. There is a quote from Tony Gaskins that I love and summarizes perfectly what I just told you. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, what you stop, and what you reinforce. Be careful what you teach. So what I just told you about might feel really secondary compared to the extensive suffering and repression many women encounter. Yet, when you're not in that situation, you still can make a difference. You have daily opportunities to teach. So be careful, ladies, what you teach. And this leads me to my second point. It's time to talk about men now. When it comes to conditionings and behaviors, we hear much more about the ones men have and their consequences on women. What I think is a pity is that we hear much less about all the men out there already strongly believing in women and acting according to their beliefs, even if, yes, they're not always perfect. We are not either. These men tend to be overlooked when they should be put in the spotlight because we are so busy focusing on the ones harming women in one way or another. What I think is even much more a pity is that we talk even less about how men are struggling, consciously or not, with what they think society or women expect from them. Women are not the only gender who's been through major changes over the last 60 or 70 years. Modern men are navigating unsettling times too, and important questions are rising for them. Questions that could have a tremendous impact on women's condition and empowerment. They look like this. What does it mean to be a man in the 21st century? How can I grow out of toxic masculinity? Can I embrace my emotions and my sensitivity and still be manly at work and at home? The needle is moving. We see men's movement emerging, books being written on those topics, conferences being organized, led by men, articles, YouTube videos. It is fantastic news, right? For men and also for women. My wish is that more women do come to understand that acknowledging men's journey with masculinity does not undermine our empowerment journey as women. It is indeed the opposite. You want to be really strategic, ladies? Support the good men and the ones trying to be. Because who's better suited to changing patriarchy and masculinity than men themselves? From the inside, men talking to men. These men are our best ambassadors. They should be seen, supported, encouraged to speak up, to start conversations between men, to lead by example. And while it's really not an easy job, because we all know the situation right now, it will for sure create a ripple effect. When we only point fingers at what is not right, when we generalize statements to a whole gender, we trigger a basic stress response in people. I mean, ladies, remember the last time you heard a man stating something exaggerated about every woman on this planet? You got annoyed, right? Well, it's the same on the other side. We really need to understand that I have to identify our allies rather than shame a whole population with the potential, the power to co-create the future of our society. a new legacy. With all the uncertainty, vulnerability, and hope that goes with such a status. For that, we have to redefine both masculinity and femininity, because as women, truth is we don't know that much more what it is to be a woman in the 21st century. And the only thing we can do is by addressing our beliefs, our fears, our behaviors, of course within our gender, but also by supporting each other on that journey and sharing about it. We already see proof that things are shifting in fields that got strongly molded by patriarchal mindset, such as work culture, leadership, and education. Movements are rising in these fields. Command and control system that is itself an heritage of patriarchy. Of course, culture, education, and political system can create obstacles. But seeing these movements are showing us that there is hope, that the society can change, that patriarchy can be shaken. My intention here is to give you food for thought by bringing you complementary outlooks from the things you know already. I'm not denying the reality of suffering that many women encounter. I consciously invite you to look at the rest of the picture, at the tiny little details, at what can seem as secondary at first as neglecting compared to the suffering, but that we can in our everyday life address and change. We can all contribute to change the world through our everyday thoughts, words, and actions, and through our commitments. So I'm leaving you with the same question I started with. How are you complicit in creating the conditions you say you don't want? And with another one, what society are we willing to contribute to? How can we act individually? And who can be our allies collectively? Thank you.